presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and powered by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Welcome to the podcast, where former San Antonio police officer, author, and pastor Tim Rupp walks you through real-life scenarios involving our police officers and digs into the depths of facts and opinions on each case. This is Cop Talk, and it starts now.
Hi, and welcome to Cop Talk, the radio show and podcast of the Strong Blue Line. I'm Tim Rupp. Here in studio with me is operations manager for the Rev.fn, Mr. Gary Austin. Hello, Gary.
Hey, Tim Rupp. How's it going?
It's going very well. You know, here it is, July the 2nd, well into summer now. And you know what summer means in Idaho?
What's that?
Winter's coming. So,
yeah, not far off.
But it's been beautiful. You know, the weather's great. Coming up on our 249th birthday of America. Can you believe that?
Yeah, that is so cool. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Love the 4th of July.
And next year's going to be the 250th.
Yeah.
And
really?
I'm just thinking President.
Okay.
Yeah, that comes after 249.
Yeah, you can do math. Okay.
Hey, we have a special guest on our show today, a retired lieutenant from LAPD.
Awesome.
It's going to be cool.
Excited.
I'd like to get to him. But before we get to our special guest, let's honor the officers who've been killed in the line of duty on this day in history. Gary, I've got Deputy Sheriff Thomas Shane, Collin County Sheriff's Office, Texas, in to watch Monday, July 2nd, 1860.
Oh, wow.
So just prior to the Civil War.
Yeah.
Deputy Shane was investigating a recent rash of robberies. He had interviewed a farm owner and was searching the nearby area when he located a man who was feeding several horses. As he talked to the man, he recognized a brand on one of the horses and attempted to place the man under arrest. The suspect produced a revolver and fatally shot Deputy Shane.
Wow.
You know, it sounds like one of them westerns you see.
It does.
The sheriff's out there, the deputies out there, and he sees this brand and, wow. Deputy Shane had served with the Collin County Sheriff's Office for 2 years, survived by his wife and 4 children.
Oh, my goodness.
35 years old and leaves a wife and 4 children. Tour of duty was 2 years. What do you have, Gary?
So this is Trooper Nicholas F. Clark, end of watch Monday, July 2nd, 2018. So Trooper Nicholas Clark and some other officers responded to a suicidal subject in Irwin, New York. And this was after the man's wife called 911 and reported that he was suicidal and possibly armed. Crisis negotiators were attempting to contact the subject, and this is when he opened fire, fatally wounding Trooper Clark. The subject was found deceased a short time later, suffering from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had served with the New York State Police for just under 3 years. He is survived by his parents and brother, was a former 2-time high school state wrestling champion, and had previously tried out for the Buffalo Bills football team.
Wow.
29 years old.
29 years old.
Very interesting.
Whole career and life ahead of him.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so young.
You know, and it's unusual for state troopers to be involved in to make family disturbance calls.
Oh, yeah.
They're mainly highways and stuff like that, but in the small rural areas, they're always there to back up the local sheriffs or the local police departments. Okay. So, anyways, law enforcement always works together. And speaking of law enforcement, like I mentioned, we have retired lieutenant from LAPD, Jeff Winegar. Jeff, welcome to our show. Yeah, it's good to be here. Your agent reached out to me and asked me about being on the show, and I did a little review and talked to you on the phone. Happy to have you on here. So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about your career. I'd like to hear how you got into policing, and then we're going to talk about your book that's going to be coming out later this summer or early into the fall. Not sure of the release date yet, On Thin Ice. But Jeff, could you share with us a little bit about how you became a police officer in Los Angeles?
Yeah, if you would have asked me when I was 18 years old, or if you would have told me when I was 18 years old that I was going to serve 33 years in Los Angeles policing the communities, diverse communities of that large city, I would have told you were nuts. But I was a Division I college ice hockey player. I went to college on scholarship, and I went out on Labor Day weekend.
So wait a minute. If you played hockey, that means you probably wasn't from Los Angeles.
No. I actually was born and raised in Ohio.
Oh, okay. Wow. That makes sense. Okay. There you go. Okay.
Yep. And I went out on Labor Day weekend. I was 20 years old, and at that time, you could drink when you were 20. Yeah. And my buddy and I, we closed the bar as we often would do. Mm-hmm. And all the students were going out onto the sidewalk, which wasn't large enough to hold everybody, so we flowed out into the street. And my buddy thought it'd be cute to prop himself up on this hood of a car that was full of these young ladies that were trying to get through the crowd of people. And when he fell off of it, he snapped the antenna off the roof. Oh. And unfortunately, there was a police officer parked just up the street, saw the whole thing. So he came down, grabbed my buddy, threw handcuffs on him, put him in the back seat of the police car. Well, I'm like, I need to find out where they're taking him, how long it's going to take them to process him, and what it's going to cost me to get him out of jail. So I approached the police officer, and he was immediately belligerent. But although I had been drinking, I had my wits about me, and I got back up on the sidewalk because I did not want to join my buddy.
Smart move.
I was not there long before a backup officer showed up, and the initial officer points at me. They walk over to me, and they say, "Let's see your identification," using an expletive. And as I reached for my wallet, they proceeded to beat me. And before I knew it, I had a split chin, and I was badly bruised, and I was in the backseat of a police car in handcuffs en route down to the city jail. And when I got there, it was kind of ridiculous because I go, "Where's my buddy?" And they're like, "Well, we let him go." So I made an inquiry, and I was the one that got arrested. So I went through this whole entire process. I was booked for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and interfering in official business. And I knew I had done nothing wrong. So I ended up spending my entire summer's earnings on an attorney, and I refused to take any of the plea deals that they offered me. And we went to the jury trial, and prior to jury trial starting, they offered me a deal I couldn't refuse. They said, "If you sign this ticket, pay the $60 fine, we'll drop all the charges." I said, "Fine." Well, this experience prompted me to start taking some criminal justice classes in college. Wow. And I found them to be quite interesting. And then about a year and a half after being arrested and going through that entire process of fighting those charges, the agency that had arrested me and the jail that I had spent a weekend in was now hiring correction officers to work at that facility. Kind of as a joke, I applied. Guess what? I got hired. It was the complete exoneration of any wrongdoing, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But that's what prompted my thoughts in regards to law enforcement. And my father was a sociology professor, and I had decided that I wanted to follow my father's footsteps in academia and be a professor of criminal justice. So prior to starting my PhD program, my father said, "It's really important that you go get at least 5 years of practical experience in law enforcement, because you'll find that your studies will be more rewarding and you'll be a heck of a lot more credible professor."
That is such wise advice.
Yeah.
Because when I took criminal justice courses in college, both of my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, the professors who had law enforcement experience were so much more credible. They weren't just speaking from theory; they were speaking from practice. So it's important. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's always really important that you're able to give a practical experience that you can apply to whatever theory or principle that you're talking about when you're teaching. Actually, my father, when I would come home to visit him back here in Ohio after I'd been out in LA policing the streets out there, he'd have me come in as a guest lecturer and teach his sociology classes, and he would just hand me the coursework for the day, and he wanted me to apply my experiences to those sociological concepts, and it was actually quite fun. But it gave some credence, and these students really seemed to enjoy it. But
cool.
So I chose LA, and the reason, I'll be honest with you, I was full of wind pistol excitement, and I was young, my early 20s, and the movie Colors with Robert Duvall and Sean Penn
Oh, yeah.
had come out, and I was just like, we're better than Los Angeles. I thought, that's a great place to get some experience. You're gonna experience more in 1 year than most people will experience an entire 30-year career in other agencies. And I looking back, I feel bad for my father because I had no interest in going to work any of the slow divisions. I threw myself right into the fire, and with LAPD, I went right to 77th Division, and that's where the riots broke out. 92 riots, Rodney King riots, and that was a heck of an experience. But throughout my career, I just found that there was opportunity to do so many diversified things, and I just did not find the right time to consider going back and getting my PhD. And I ended up making a 33-year law enforcement career out of that initial intention of being there 5 years.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, quite even. So this brings you now we fast forward. You had that long career, and I know in the book you talk about the different places that you were assigned and you worked. But why the book On Thin Ice?
Well, I spent 33 years policing Los Angeles, and I had a number of experiences that I saw the opportunity for law enforcement to improve. So really the book, what it provides the reader, it gives them an understanding of my personal background, my professional experiences, and my practical insights in regards to what I suggest are some actionable solutions moving forward where we can improve the integrity, empathy, and the accountability of law enforcement moving forward in the 21st century. And it's really about, my goal is to enlighten the reader, have them have a sense of empowerment, and be hopeful for the future in law enforcement, because there's been this growing divide between community expectations and criticism of law enforcement, and what's occurring in law enforcement. So that's why I came up with the on thin ice aspect of it. That law enforcement is on thin ice, but it can be the one to determine how it moves forward. And it is my hope that through my experiences, I can give back to the profession that I care so much about, because I do bleed blue. But I am very honest about my experiences, and not all of them are favorable. Some of them are quite ugly. And but if we're not honest about what our experiences have been, then we're not really putting ourselves in the optimal position to maximize our ability to improve and be as excellent as we need to be moving forward.
Right.
So let me ask you this. Who is the primary audience for your book?
I get that all the time. People will ask me that, and people would say, well, geez, you can't have that large of an audience. But listen, it's from the suburban housewife all the way to our legislators and everybody in between, to include law enforcement officers as well as law enforcement executives. I have a vast experience within the LAPD, and then I did quite a bit of research where I went overseas, and I went over to Europe and studied law enforcement over there for this book. And I interviewed a number of top neuroscience researchers that do have an emphasis on performance under stress and what we need to be considering in law enforcement relative to enhancing our officers' ability to perform optimally when they're handling a rapidly unfolding tactical scenario, when they're under a heck of a lot of stress, making split-second decisions. And it's all very interesting. And I provide all that information and the research data and stuff in the book. Now, trust me, it doesn't read like a academic book. It's rather engaging, and it's whether you're interested in my personal background or my stories of the various incidents I've been involved in the job, which were, I nearly lost my life a few times, to the challenges I had when I ran the Rampart gang unit after the crash scandal, Rafael Perez scandal, under the consent decree. My experiences there, to working for Chief Bratton, where I would brief him on all officer-involved shootings and lethal force incidents, and I wrote his rationale for the findings for those cases that were submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners, who are the ultimate adjudicators of those cases. And then I went on to become the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigated all officer-involved shootings and lethal force incidents. So I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly.
For sure.
There's quite a bit of experience that I feel I would be negligent if I didn't share that in an attempt to improve law enforcement moving forward.
So in the Rampart incident, the crash cases, and all of that in LAPD, all this corruption, if you will, took place in the late 1990s, correct?
Yes, well, arguably, you had the Rodney King incident. You had the Christopher Commission as a result of that.
And that was like in 92.
It came out as a report relative to that, and they said that there was an ingrained culture of racism and excessive force in the LAPD, and then we had the riots in 92, and you had the Webster Commission, where they came out and they were critical of the department relative to the lack of preparation and the inability to control the unrest and the poor intelligence that the department had, and not anticipating what potentially could occur in the event that these officers were found not guilty. So, the criticism was there before the late 90s, but it really blew up at that point.
Okay.
Rafael Perez, he worked Rampart Division, and he worked the crash unit, and he was involved in stealing pounds of cocaine out of evidence lockup and selling it on the streets for his own personal financial gain. He was involved in officer-involved shootings on duty, where they would plant guns and fabricate the evidence to justify the shootings. There were over, as a result of him being found out, there were over 200 people released from prison because their cases were so tainted. And, there were even officers off duty committing bank robberies.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're talking the most egregious corruption you could ever find in law enforcement. And I, at the time, in the late 90s, I worked Metropolitan Division. And give your listeners an idea what that is. That's like the special forces of the department. That's SWAT and the K-9, and we're the highly trained entity of the organization. And I promoted to sergeant out of Metropolitan Division. And I didn't want to go to Rampart. When you promote, you get to put in a wish list. You get 3 divisions where you'd like to go. Rampart, out of the 18 divisions that were an option for me to choose from, probably would have been the 18th due to all the problems they were having. Well, I got assigned there because they were putting in a new management team, and they were trying to put in people that they felt could affect a cultural change in that toxic environment at Rampart Division. So I went there, and it turned out to be the best thing for me. But then I had an opportunity when I was selected to be the officer in charge of the newly formed gang enforcement detail, because ultimately what happened, because of this crash corruption scandal, they disbanded all crash, but we still needed an entity that performed the same function. So they created the gang enforcement detail that had a whole different chain of command structure and a higher level of accountability. And I was the officer in charge of that unit, and under the consent decree. And we were under that consent decree for 10 years. And I worked that for 3 years because part of the consent decree required that assignment have a time cap on it. So you could work there 3 years, but then you had to move on, not only in the supervision, but also the officers. So they're trying to prevent corruption, people getting too embedded.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you a couple questions. What year did you retire?
I retired January of 24.
Oh, wow. You just retired.
I'll be darned.
Man, it was just a year ago. Okay, about a year and a half ago. Okay, let me ask you this, too. When you left LAPD a year and a half ago, if I were going to move to LA, what could you tell me about the police department?
The police department in LA, it's facing a lot of challenges. It's a very challenging community to have to police, especially under these heavily political times.
Yes.
And recently we just saw the riotous actions that were going on out there just a little over a week ago. And it's, from the outsider looking in, they don't really understand. But there's a lot of laws in California and policies with the LAPD that prohibit the department and its officers from doing certain things. And I'll share with you a policy. We had Special Order 40. It was back in 1979 under Darrell Gates. And Los Angeles is such a diverse community. And there's a heck of a lot of undocumented people living in the population. Mm-hmm. And Special Order 40 prohibited law enforcement officers in the LAPD from inquiring or taking any lawful action against people based on their immigration status. And that has been the case since 79. And the rationale for that is that we police this entire community, not just a portion of the community. And the fact that such a large portion of the population is undocumented, we still need them to feel comfortable coming forward and reporting crime and being witnesses to crime and not being afraid to approach law enforcement. And that's the whole rationale behind why Special Order 40 was put into place. And then you have the reality that in 2018, California became a sanctuary state, and which prohibited law enforcement from engaging people solely because of their immigration status, mm-hmm. as well as detaining them and holding them for federal immigration deportation efforts, unless there were the exception of certain very violent crimes. So it's a very different climate, and it's not like policing every other city necessarily in the United States. But the decisions that the leaders have to make are being influenced by a number of factors that make it very challenging.
Yeah, I imagine, man. That mm-hmm. was, when I first got on with San Antonio Police Department in '83, it wasn't too long prior to that if a SAPD officer arrested an illegal alien, they were given a bounty for it. They would get like $25 for arresting them. And wow. Obviously in San Antonio, we had a large Hispanic population, and a lot of illegal aliens living in the city. But that didn't stop us from, but the fact of the matter is, we came across them, we would notify Border Patrol or whatever, and they normally wouldn't even come out. So it wasn't that we couldn't arrest them, we wouldn't enforce the law that way. We wouldn't arrest them for that, but nothing prohibited us by policy or directive not to. So, but it's and that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. They think policing is the same in every city in America, and it's really not, especially when you get to the larger cities. Mm-hmm. New York is different from L.A., different from San Antonio. San Antonio is different from Houston and Dallas. I mean, there's just different cultures and different political environment, and so it's policing is very interesting. Then you have federal policing and all that. So
it absolutely is. It's not whether you necessarily agree politically with what laws have been implemented or whatever. But the bottom line is, and the reality is that law enforcement has to abide by the laws in which their communities are being held to adhere to. So the reality is. Right now, the bombing of Iran, we have this increased risk of a terrorist incident occurring here in the United States as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And to make that even more concerning is the deportation efforts. There are about 45% of the FBI agents that work the major field offices were diverted from their normal assignments of investigating terrorism and looking into cybercrime. And they were focusing on immigration. And now we have this increased level where now the administration's putting them back, and they have to play some catch up. So there may be these gaps. And what is the thing that's going to save us from a terrorist attack and being able to divert something from occurring? And it's see something, say something. And we really need people to feel comfortable coming forward. And I would say right now, due to the environment in Los Angeles, a lot of people may see something, but they won't feel comfortable coming forward to any law enforcement officer or anybody in that type of an authority position because of their fear of being deported. So these concerns are much more global than. It's not a simple answer, and I'm just giving the realities of it. I'm not sharing my opinion one way or the other.
Right.
I'm just giving the realities of the circumstances that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and it's a tough call, because on one hand you can see, you can make a case either way. And it's just a tough thing. And I would have never thought several years ago when I became a police officer that an officer on the streets in any city in America is actually global implications of what you're doing. I would have never thought that. But that's where we are today.
Yeah, this day and age, when you look at, you better be paying attention to what's going on throughout the world, because whatever's occurring throughout the world is going to impact law enforcement domestically. Yeah. And, I saw that with 9/11. I was very much involved with the counterterrorism efforts of the LAPD, and I had access to information that the general public didn't have, and it's rather quite frightening. The incidents that are thwarted, but just by nearly sheer luck, really. And it's about getting information and being able to take that and look at it in like a data fusion, where you're integrating the information from multiple sources and creating a more comprehensive understanding of the potential threats. And then you're able to take the actions and the counterterrorism measures to prevent something from happening. But it's all about information. There's different types of sources of intelligence, but one of the most important one is the human intelligence, and that's what you get from the public that'll step forward and tell you, what's going on.
Yeah, and it's so true. I know when I worked homicide, an experienced homicide detective told me that you don't have to have all the answers, Tim. You just need to know who does and find that person who does have the answer. So that is such good advice. Jeff, we are out of time. Thank you so much for being a guest on Cop Talk. And the book is On Thin Ice. It will be released late summer, early fall. Look for it at Amazon, all the different platforms where you can buy books. And I'm looking forward to reading the book. And it's not just written to police officers, it's written to anybody.
Listen, I think anybody they're going to find something that they can take away from this.
Yeah.
It's a very broad audience that I think it'll appeal to. And listen, to the listeners, you go to onthinicebook.com. That will take you to the website, and you can get put on the email list, and you can also sign up to get the prologue for free. So you can kind of get a head start on it and get an idea of what the book's all about. Okay,
and that's what is that website again? onthinicewhat.org?
onthinicebook.com.
Okay, onthinicebook.com. onthinicebook.com. Thanks again, Jeff. Appreciate having you here. Hey, you can catch Cop Talk on Amazon, Google, Apple, YouTube, and Spotify podcast platforms. Thanks for listening in. If you have a topic or question you want to address on Cop Talk, send me an email. You can email suggestions, questions, comments, or complaints to coptalk@therev.fm. That's coptalk@therev.fm. Thought from the good book today. Listen to the advice and accept instruction that you may gain wisdom in the future. Thanks for joining us and helping to make the thin blue line a strong blue line.
Cop Talk is presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and sponsored by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Questions and comments are always welcome by email to coptalk@therev.fm. Listen, follow, leave a review, and share this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or YouTube. And visit thestrongblueline.org to learn how you can be a supporter. Cop Talk is a Rev FM production, produced and edited by Gary Austin. Thank you for joining us on Cop Talk.